Okay, so get ready because we are diving deep today. Like, really deep.
Deep into an election that still has people scratching their heads.
You got that right.
Yeah.
We're talking about the 2000 U.S. presidential election. And no, we're not just recounting the Florida recount drama.
We're going way beyond those hanging chads.
Exactly. We're using this really fascinating analysis to uncover the surprising factors that made this election such a nail-biter.
Because let's face it, on the surface, it looked like a shoo-in for Al Gore.
Right. I mean, you've got a sitting president with approval ratings through the roof.
A seemingly strong Democratic candidate in Gore.
You'd think it'd be a cakewalk.
And yet...
And yet, it came down to a handful of votes.
Which is exactly what makes this election such a fascinating case study.
Okay, so before we get into the weeds, let's set the stage a bit. The year 2000, what was the political landscape like?
Well, as you mentioned, the economy was booming. Clinton was actually pretty popular despite, well,
Yeah, the scandals.
right, the scandals. But even with all that, even the election forecasting models at the time.
You mean those things that are supposed to tell us who's going to win?
Exactly.
Eh?
Even those predicted a comfortable Gore victory.
So, not just pundits, but the data geeks also thought Gore had it in the bag.
Which tells us something really important. The factors that tipped the scales in Bush's favor weren't the obvious ones.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, if it wasn't just about the economy or the usual political calculations, what else was going on?
Well, that's where this deep dive gets really interesting.
Let's hear it.
The source we're looking at today digs into some of the surprising undercurrents that influence this election, things that often get overlooked in the usual post-election analysis.
Undercurrents. I like that. So let's start unpacking these undercurrents. Where do we begin?
Well, let's start with the economy. You mentioned it was booming, but the source raises this almost counterintuitive point.
Counterintuitive. How so?
Well, it asks whether voters solely credited the Democrats for the good economy.
Interesting. So even though times were good, maybe there wasn't that direct link in voters' minds.
Exactly. And even more intriguing, the analysis asks if the booming economy might have actually worked against Gore.
Wait, what? How could a good economy hurt the incumbent party?
Well, think about it this way. When things are going well, are people more or less likely to want change?
I see what you mean. It's like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Precisely. The source calls this the complacency factor. Voters were feeling good, so they were less inclined to rock the boat, even if they didn't necessarily give Gore all the credit.
Okay, so we've got this unexpected economic angle, but then there's the elephant in the room, right?
Yes, the Clinton scandal.
Exactly. How much did that baggage, even with Gore trying to distance himself, ultimately hurt his chances?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The source argues that the scandal had this almost paradoxical effect.
Paradoxical. How so?
On one hand, it definitely energized social conservatives who were already likely skeptical of Gore's more liberal policies.
Right. They saw him as an extension of Clinton, scandals and all?
Exactly. But here's the twist. The source also suggests that the scandal might have actually helped solidify support for Gore among his base.
So it's like this double-edged sword firing up both sides of the political spectrum.
Exactly. It really highlights how values, particularly social values, can sometimes outweigh pure economic interest in voters' minds.
Okay, so we've got the economy possibly working against Gore in a way no one expected, and then this moral outrage factor playing a huge role. But the source digs into even more nuances, right?
Absolutely. Because this election wasn't just about the issues, it was also about two very different candidates with very different personalities and approaches. And according to this analysis, the way each campaign was run played a significant role in the outcome.
All right, so let's unpack that. I mean, Gore had the experience, the name recognition. How did Bush manage to pull it off? So walk me through this. How does a guy with, let's be honest, not a ton of political experience go up against a seasoned politician like Gore and win?
Well, the source argues that Bush, despite his lack of experience, ran a surprisingly effective campaign.
Effective how?
It was a campaign that really understood the power of perception. They knew they couldn't beat Gore on policy specifics.
Because Gore had experience in spades.
Exactly. So they focused on crafting this image of Bush as a relatable, trustworthy leader.
Someone voters felt like they knew.
Yeah, like the source puts it, Bush was the guy you'd want to have a beer with.
Interesting. So while Gore was hitting those policy details hard,
Bush was trying to connect with voters on a more personal level.
it's kind of like that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Right. And while that might not always be true in life, The source suggests it played a big role in this election.
Because it tapped into something very human. We want to like our leaders,
Absolutely. We're drawn to people who seem authentic, approachable.
even if we don't agree with them on every issue.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the source argues Gore, despite his experience, struggled with this likability factor.
You mean he didn't come across as likable?
Well, not necessarily. It's more that his demeanor, especially in those televised debates, might have hurt him.
How so?
He often seemed stiff, overly rehearsed.
Especially compared to Bush's more casual style.
Right. Bush came across as more off the cuff, which played well with some voters.
It's amazing how these little things, like how you come across on TV, can have such a huge impact.
Absolutely. And this wasn't just about being likable. It was about embodying certain qualities that voters associate with the presidency. Bush, whether intentionally or not, just fit that mold better in the eyes of many voters.
Okay, so we've got the economy, the Clinton scandal, the battle of personalities. But there's another factor at play here, right?
Ah, yes. We can't forget about Ralph Nader.
The Green Party candidate.
Yeah.
A lot of people argue he cost Gore the election.
Yeah, and the source we're looking at makes a really compelling case for that argument.
Break it down for me.
So Nader himself didn't win many votes overall, but
But he siphoned off crucial votes from Gore.
especially in Florida.
Right. That's where it really matters.
Exactly. And this speaks to a larger point about the political climate of 2000.
What do you mean?
America was deeply, almost evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. It was a recipe for a close election.
So it's like even a small shift, like those Nader voters, could have changed everything.
Absolutely. And this really gets to the heart of what the source calls a perfect storm.
Perfect storm.
Yeah, like it wasn't just one ingredient.
Yeah.
It was this whole recipe. The economy, the scandal, personalities, Nader, all of it swirling together to create this crazy close election.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is we often think these elections hinge on one big thing, but
But it's rarely that simple.
right, like we look back and think, oh, the Clinton scandal obviously hurt Gore, but
But it might have actually helped him with some voters.
exactly. And same with the economy. Good economy, you'd think slam dunk, but
It can create this weird complacency, like, why change anything?
it really makes you think twice, huh? Like when we see those elections that seem like landslides.
Right. Were they really? Or was it just a matter of a few things going a different way?
It makes those landslide victories seem a lot less certain.
And that's a good thing to remember, right? Because it reminds us, even when we think we've got it all figured out, there's always more to the story.
There really is. Well, I know I'm going to look at election results a little differently after this.
Me too. It's like, we think we're choosing a president, but...
But really, we're choosing between all these different forces, these undercurrents that are shaping the country.
And those forces are always changing.
Exactly.
Right.
Which makes studying these elections so fascinating.
Absolutely. Because the more we understand the past, the better equipped we are to navigate the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that was a deep dive if I ever saw one. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the 2000 election. It's one we're definitely still unpacking all these years later. And for everyone listening, keep those thinking caps on because, like we learned today, there's always more to uncover, more to explore.